Hello and welcome. This is the Goal is AFL podcast, and this is round 14 of the AFL season. It has come, it has gone. We are, getting towards the home stretch of the season. We're seeing a lot of teams who are starting to fall off. We're seeing a lot of teams who are starting to solidify themselves in the 8, and we're seeing some teams who are still fighting for that 7, 8, 9 spot. My name's Harrison. This is Caleb up here, and we're going to be chatting about all the results from this week. We had 4 teams on a bye this week, so 2 less games than we would usually have, but we still had Thursday, Friday, Saturdays and Sundays, and yeah, it kind of spaced the games out a little bit kind of nicely, to be honest. I think with how busy we kind of were this weekend, I think that if we had all 9 games, we would have struggled to see them all. But yeah, a little bit more palatable to be able to watch all of them spread out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But yeah, Caleb, how did you enjoy this round 14 of AFL?
Yeah, it was a good weekend of footy. I was going to say there was a few results in there that were quite interesting. Specifically the Bulldogs St Kilda one, because I look at those teams and I'm like, oh, they're pretty close in terms of where they may end up. Whereas it was a pretty convincing performance for them.
Yeah.
The Dockers, Blake Mantle, almost lost in the West against North Melbourne.
Sure did.
So that was an interesting one. And then Port Adelaide, Melbourne. There's just a lot of games in there where you can tell there's a lot at stake for these teams in terms of if they don't start getting wins on the board, their season might be over.
Yeah.
So I think what you said before about this being the home stretch and teams needing to get their act together is definitely accurate. So let's get straight into it game by game.
So the first game of the round was the Thursday night game, was the St Kilda versus Western Bulldogs. And you said before that both of these teams are sort of similar when you talk about ladder position, but in my mind, these teams are leagues apart, and this game kind of showed it. And I think that the Western Bulldogs are a far stronger team, and they really should be solidified in the 8. It's really kind of disappointing that they, I know they had injuries, but they probably should be in that 6-5 spot because of the way they play sometimes. It's just they just tend to be a little bit streaky, but against St Kilda, they absolutely dominated them from the beginning. St Kilda was a home game, but also Western Bulldogs play obviously at Marvel Stadium as their home as well, so it's kind of like a neutral game, so there was really no home field advantage. But yeah, the Bulldogs just absolutely romped them. Bontempelli incredible as always, Kennedy with a couple goals, Bailey Dale 36 disposals, just absolutely ran riot over them. And yeah, I think that the Saints really have to think about where they are, who they are, and especially if they're going to be trying to keep some of the players like Wanganeen Millera, trying to think how are we going to go forward as a football club, especially with them probably not making the 8 again. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing, and perhaps it could be time for some Ross Lyon movement changes, something like that. I know he's a solid coach, but what do you think about that sort of take?
Well, I just had to glance back at the table because they're 14th.
Yeah.
And they're only 8 points off the Bulldogs, who are in 9th. And like you said, I agree, they're leagues apart. St Kilda have had some games this season so far where they've looked pretty decent.
Yeah.
They beat the Cats and whatnot, but they're just so inconsistent. But the biggest red flag, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, the fact that they're losing games where the opposition is scoring 100 or more points is a massive problem.
Yeah.
To have such a leaky defense, they're basically running Old Trafford, with a leaky roof. The water's just streaming through. The goals are pouring in. And it's just not good enough for the Saints. And they've got halfway decent team, but at the end of the day, with Ross Lyon, who's incredibly experienced, who's been in the game for so long, he should be able to get a better tactical tune out of these players. And Luke Beveridge is no snooze fest either, but he has definitely got the camaraderie built within his team. And despite them not having the amount of wins that they may have wanted at this stage of the season, they're definitely on the right track in terms of team spirit and team play style.
The Saints and the Red Devils, that's a wild comparison there between Man United and St Kilda. But I think they're somewhat of a good comparison in terms of sort of an archaic style of play, and also just not been very relevant over the last 5 or 6 years. So yeah, I know you're very happy about that as a Chelsea fan, but yes, St Kilda again losing another game that they, I didn't think they should win it, but man, I would like to see them put up a bit of a better fight. And the Bulldogs, they continue on their merry way, and that leads us on to the Friday night game, which was actually down in freezing Launceston. It's
Oh
probably
mate,
about
bloody
probably about
cold.
4 or 5 degrees down there with a bit of wind chill, and you could see it with the play. There was definitely a few slippery moments, and the Hawks eventually just pipped the Crows right at the very end. This was a great game to kind of look at you. What are you doing?
Like you should have been wearing
This
these
is
on
yeah.
Friday night.
There was
Holy
it
dooly.
was
It was
cold.
bloody
It
cold.
looked very cold. It's kind of just before we get into the actual game. It's like the AFL really need to think about why are we playing a night game in Tasmania, which it's kind of the same sort of thing as why would you play a midday game on the Gold Coast or Brisbane in the middle of April? Like it's it's going to be hot in those climates at those time of year. It's going to be freezing cold in the middle of I know they want a Friday night game down in Launceston, like a bit of prime time for the Hawks, but it just feels like that was a bit of a miss because it really showed with the play. I know these two teams are very good, and it was a hard fought contest, but I think in some warmer conditions they probably would have played a little bit better.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I feel like you have something to say about this game. What's your take on it?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed watching this game despite how low scoring it was. But this, to me, was a big conversation piece in terms of Tasmania football overall, because the big talking point coming out of Tasmania with the recent political landscape is
Yeah.
that they needed a new stadium and it needs to have a roof.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that this game, which happened in Launceston as opposed to Hobart, where the proposed new stadium will take
Yeah.
place, is that, yeah, playing in 3 degrees is not ideal. You're not going to
Yeah.
be able to convince many players to come down and play for the club if those are the conditions they're going to have to deal with week in, week out.
Yeah.
So tough sell. In saying that, though, I think the reason they had this particular fixture in Tassie is because they want to still build that footy community and have a showcase for that area and for those people. And the Hawks have done that for many, many years, so it's no surprise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. It was a miscalculation in terms of the time slot.
Yeah.
It was. But I think, again, it just adds more fuel to the fire about the fact that they need a new stadium. It needs to have a roof like Marvel, and these things need to get organized ASAP. But in terms of the game, I really enjoyed it. I'll say Hawthorn and Adelaide are both teams that are going to be pushing for that top 4 spot.
Yeah.
The Crows were really, really good, and the Hawks just in the last quarter somehow got a few kicks together and scrambled it through. And yeah, despite the hot contest, there was lots of omelets being made, for lack of a better term.
You can see the worm where the largest lead at any break was only like 14 points. Like going into the fourth quarter, the lead was only 3 points for the Crows. Like 4 points, sorry. So and in the end, the 3 point margin it was pretty tight the whole game. And as you can see, kind of by the blips in the last quarter, Hawks kicked a goal, go in front. Then the Crows responded, and then the Hawks responded again finally, and there was it felt like the Hawks probably should have won this game by a bit more. The Crows didn't. They weren't like blowing them away. As you can kind of see by the end, they did kick a lot of points, did the Crows. They probably should have kicked more. Like they were 5-14. But I think that's to speak about the conditions. Not being able to get your proper kicking rhythm, whether it be on the run or set shots. So, but anyway, these two teams will definitely be, fighting for the 8. It felt a little bit finals atmosphere. You know what I mean? So this was a great game, and yeah, I think you probably could have played this game in April or even earlier May, at night time, and it would have been beautiful conditions. But this was probably a little bit too much. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. But yeah, I think you're right about the Tasmanian team needing a roof. The next game, which I think we'll probably dive in a bit more, which we were both at, was the Lions losing to the Giants 96-107. The big number there that's screaming to me is the 13-18 for the Lions and the 17-5 for the Giants. At one point, they were 8-0 with the Giants, and they had they didn't have the lead. We actually had a fair amount. When I say we, the Lions had a fair amount of lead going into that second quarter, into the halftime. But yeah, just the Giants kept pushing, kept chipping away, pushing the Lions. They kept on giving them pressure. The kicking from Jesse Hogan was mercurial. The Lions just missed set shot after set shot. They were kicking to weird positions on the ground. There was a couple of out of bounds on the fulls. They came back a little bit at the end, but overall, this is a game again that the Lions probably should have absolutely buried. Very similar to the Demons game about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, it's one of those reoccurring themes. So, go ahead, Caleb. I'll let you have the floor. What's your take on this game?
Well, if we were to compare this game to a boxing match,
Yeah.
in the second quarter, the Lions were constantly pummeling the Giants and they were hitting the canvas, and somehow they kept getting up. And then in the fourth quarter, GWS just came out and were laying jab, 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 and just finally wore the Lions out.
Yeah.
And they got the job done. And to me, this was a wholly unacceptable way to lose a game of football. Coming into it, I wasn't exactly confident because this is the type of game that the Brisbane Lions just don't win.
Yeah.
And GWS, they didn't play their best football and they still somehow beat us away from home, which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Look, the Brisbane Lions team is so good on paper, but there now needs to be some questions asked of certain individuals and their form and what they are capable of.
Yeah.
Because, they've got a lot of players on the fringes who are playing in the VFL who probably deserve a shot. And if you're not performing, you need to get put out of the team. So Fagan's going to have a lot of hard decisions in weeks moving forward about who actually stays in this team. Because, I look at Charlie Cameron as who's supposed to be one of our star players and very rarely gets on the goal sheet. He has a couple flurries, but you've got to be consistent all 4 quarters. But the other big story that I guess we can talk about is, of course, Jack Payne going down with a patella injury.
Yeah, done for the season. Unfortunately, big Jack Payne is now out, which means that we're going to have to do some reshuffling in the back line, bring Harris Andrews perhaps more into on a key forward type of role instead of the floating kind of intercept guy. So that might change the structure a bit. Could it perhaps see a guy like Sam Day, maybe Eric Hipwood play a bit more back, bring Darcy. I think that's just straight swap is Darcy Gardner coming in.
I agree with that.
Another one that you could bring in is Tom Duday. Still yet to play a game for the Lions, played in the VFL. Could come in. He's not as big as Jack Payne, but I think that it's a risk. But also, what else do you have at this point? So you bring Duday in. I'd like to see Kitty Coleman come back in as well.
Yep.
Even if it's tough to break into the midfield, but we still have and we've got some great defenders. But yeah, that Jack Payne injury is going to be a big miss for us. Yeah, I think the thing is our defense. I know we gave up 17 goals, but I feel like the defense was on the run most of the time because of the quick transition from missed goals. We'd kick it, we'd have a set shot, we'd just have no structure in defending the kick-ins, and the Giants just were able to come down. And Aaron Cadman as well, the former number 1 overall pick, kicked his bag, his first big kind of game. It just seems like sometimes these fringe players have big games against us, they have their breakout games and we just don't game plan for them. And we can't even say we shut down Jesse Hogan. He scored 5 goals. So I don't know. It was very disheartening. It was very frustrating. The conversation needs to be had about Charlie Cameron. There's, Will McLaughlin, who is kicked 4 goals in the VFL. He's a small forward, a lot more athleticism at this age. It just feels like Charlie Cameron. I don't know. It's sad to say, but I think his time might be nearly done with the Lions.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of his career, his athleticism is kind of gone just from age. I've spoken for a lot there, so that's a little bit of a vent. Do you have any kind of frustrations you want to vent about this game?
The last thing I'll add with regards to Charlie Cameron is I just feel like the role he plays in this team is different to what I think his best play style is.
Yeah.
I see him in the back pocket far too often, doing things in and around the half-back line. To me, Charlie Cameron should be either the last or the second last forward up the field, and we should be kicking the ball to space for him to run into or to run over behind so he can run onto it and do his agile magician work. And I just don't see him do that very often. And I think it might be because of what you just said about his lack of athleticism, and it declining over his later years. But if that's the case, you need to bring someone else in. And the fact that we had Kyle Lohman on the sub,
Yeah.
like, he's a star player. I know he's got a couple injuries this season. He's not been his
Yeah.
best, but he's going to be the one for the future. And
Yeah.
maybe he's the one you got to bring in.
Yeah. Well, and we had, speak about some positives. You had Brandon Starcevich come back in. You had Logan Morris kick a few goals. He presented really nicely. You had, a good game from the midfield overall. We weren't completely destroyed. The ruck was a little bit of a bad one. Darcy Fort got pretty badly beaten most of the time, so I'd really like to see Big O come back. It's a good game from the Ashcrofts. McCluggage was good. One of them players that just was missing in this game, he had an off game, Rayner, of course. He kind of has those good games and then bad games and good games and bad games. He just is very hit and miss, hot and cold. But, I mean, overall, I think a lot of players did have good games. It's just that last little finishing. And I think what it comes down to is just the accuracy. Like, that's really it. If we
landed those goals, we would have won the game.
If we kicked like two more goals, we obviously, were more in the game. And I just think that any of those kind of easy set shots that we should have nailed, or if the Giants just missed a couple goals, sometimes it just comes down to that. So I think if we played this game, another 10 times, the Lions might win it 4 times, And the Giants have been a bit of a bogey team for us throughout the years, which kind of makes that semi-final last year just absolutely more incredible because they've beaten us, I think, besides the final, the last 4 straight times now. So anyway, that is the wrap up of that game. We went a little bit long, but hey, we're Lions fans and we got a little bit frustrated by that game. We'll move on to the next game, which we could probably kind of skip a little bit. Is the Cats winning by 95 points, absolutely smashing Essendon down at Geelong, 8-8, 56 to 23 goals, 13, 151.
Wowza.
Yeah, absolutely incredible by the Geelong Cats, who the Lions have next week. So I'm a little bit scared by that one. I think most of the time, the Lions usually would think themselves as a kind of in most games. I think this game against Geelong is, I don't know, man. 2 versus 3 now. Geelong jumped up to the second spot. I don't know, man. This feels like it's going to be a hard game to win. I think the Lions will still be in it, but man, it's going to be hard. What do you think about kind of the next game against Geelong? I am skipping over this game, yes, because there's not much to talk about. There's not much to talk about. I don't
have much to add. But in terms of next week, look, it's at GMHBA, so that's already big problem. Bailey Smith is in career best form.
Yeah.
Paddy Dangerfield, I think, is back from injury, so that's always not ideal. And I just feel all of their players, like DeConey and like their players coming across the back line, they're all just sort of hitting their best form now. Like they weren't at their very best at the beginning of the season, but now they've all slowly got into form and they're really hitting their stride. And yeah, I'm a little bit nervous. I didn't think we'd beat them at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
So now that they've actually got the wheels turning and the oil greased and all that kind of stuff, like they're a formidable outfit. And I expect Geelong to probably win next week.
Yeah. I think we'll touch a little bit on Essendon as well. I just was a little bit disappointed. I think that, yes, they're young, but I mean, it's kind of is where they are at this point of the season. Like I was expecting a little bit more fight, but yeah, 95 points at Geelong. It's pretty dominant, and I think that Essendon kind of can just move on to next week. They've got Freo next week on Thursday night, so a little bit of a short turnaround for them.
The Battle of the Brothers ended with Chris Scott winning once again. Yeah, I almost messed that up again.
Well, I mean, Brad Scott played for he coached North and then Essendon, so 2 clubs that are pretty hit and miss a lot of the time, whereas he's coached Geelong, who are a winning team. So we'll move on to our next game, which was the last game, which was the Saturday night game of North Melbourne versus Freo, which was, funnily enough, a North Melbourne home game.
Yeah,
which was
I can't believe that.
At Optus Stadium. So I think it's a little bit of a cash grab in terms of North know that they're going to get a lot of fans, especially last week they were playing in Bunbury, which is an hour south of Perth, where they had the West Coast game, and now they had Freo at Optus Stadium. So they kind of, because you get more money when you're the home team from ticket sales. So they knew that this was going to sell very well because it's obviously a Freo home stadium. So trying to cash a little bit in there. I mean, Freo like it. They don't have to travel, as a Perth team. They don't have to travel at all. Both of these teams got to stay at home for the next basically 3 weeks. As in, sorry, when I say two teams, I mean West Coast because they played at home this week, and also Freo because they played away but at home. So it's kind of a win-win for both of these. But I guess the Australian Kangaroos, as we're going to call them, can't really call them North Melbourne anymore. They play in like 4 different venues as the home team. I'm surprised they didn't go to Alice Springs and play a game there, but it is what it is. This game was actually very entertaining. The North,
Oh yeah.
I'll jump on to the worm here. North kicked, a fair amount of that they had the lead pretty much at halftime. Had the lead pretty much like throughout the first quarter, and then at halftime, Freo did have the lead, but then North Melbourne started coming back. They just kicked a bunch of goals. Jack Darling kicked a goal on the siren. Luke Parker kicked a really good goal, and then Freo just kind of had that last little bit of momentum, that last little bit of energy, and just pushed right at the end. It was wet as well, a lot of rain. And the thing that stood out to me, I think, was Freo. They are very, very formidable when it comes to their forward line. They got a very good forward line. Murphy Reed, Patrick Voss, Luke Tracy, like all of these guys who actually had a really good mark at the back line to kind of seal the game. Their forward line, if they click, is really, really good. And yeah, Freo now, I think they're in the 8. They're in 8 spots, so they're kind of coming into form at kind of a nice time of the season. Look out for Freo. What did you think of this game?
Well, this is why so many people in the footy punditry world were saying Fremantle is going to be one to watch this season, because from back to front, they've got such a good list, and they are, like you said, very formidable, but they just haven't quite been able to click like a well-oiled machine. And look, beating North Melbourne by 6 points is not something that I am going to give too much congratulations towards.
Yeah.
I think it's more so a reflection of North Melbourne and how competitive they can be, because they gave Brisbane a run for their money. They've given other teams a run for their money, and of course Fremantle. They're not one of the best teams in the competition, but they're certainly leagues above North Melbourne. And Alistair Clarkson came away from the game saying, there's positives to take away from this. We were within the contest for a majority of the game, and the fact that we were able to reel in the scoreline and potentially get the win at the end is it's massive for them. Yeah. So I think it was an interesting game from that perspective, because like Justin Longmuir, like a lot of questions have been asked of him in recent weeks about the consistency and whether he is the man to take this team forward. Because when you've got talent at your disposal and then the team's still not operating, the questions inevitably are going to be reflected on the coach.
Yeah.
And I think Fremantle do have a chance of making the 8. But if they're going to have close calls like this with the teams that are very obviously below them, that's a red flag in my opinion. So I don't expect them to go deep into September, even if they do make it. But hey, North Melbourne, I like watching them play sometimes. They've had some weeks where they've just got absolutely obliterated and played off the park, and you're like, what the hell am I watching? But then there are other weeks and they show up and it's like, you know what? I actually enjoy watching the blue and white army run around. So, it is what it is. It was an entertaining game from a neutral's perspective. And Mantle, they won this week.
Shin bonus spirit. We'll definitely, I think they could be encouraged by the results of the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks instead of kind of wallowing too much in the start they had at the start of the season. So good on the Freo, but also North Melbourne. Don't feel too hard done by. The next game was at Port Adelaide. At Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide versus Melbourne. 93-68 was the final score. Pretty good game, this one. As you can see by the worm, it was pretty tight. But Port Adelaide kind of just held them off and had the lead for the majority of the second, third, and fourth quarters. I like. Couple of standouts was Keziah Pickett, of course, who signed a massive deal to stay at Melbourne. A lot of people thought he was going to leave, but he stayed at Melbourne. Port, they have some really good midfielders, but their forwards still don't fill me with a lot of confidence. I just think
that's their biggest weakness by far.
You've got to look out for Port. I think a little bit. I think if they have a couple more wins, people will start taking this seriously. But I'm not going to be like, they're going to make it into the 8, and even if they do, I just don't think their forward line is good enough to play with the big boys. That's my feeling. So, and the name of the game is scoring goals. So, this was a bit of a rough and tumble kind of fun game. Melbourne, of course, showing a little bit of fight. They're obviously better than what we thought they would be at the start of the year. So what was your take on this Sunday afternoon game?
Yeah, well, the aggression was really high in this game. Lots of argy-bargy, a lot of physical confrontations. I feel like this played a lot like an elimination final. You know, these
Yeah,
teams are, towards the bottom end of the table, and they need to start racking up points on the board if they're going to make it into the 8, because everyone above them is in far better form than they are.
yeah.
So it was interesting to see this contest play out in that fashion. Zach Butters, who I know is one of
Ugh.
Port Adelaide's best players. I didn't realize he was such a grub.
Yeah, you didn't realize Zach, but all
No,
right.
I don't follow Port Adelaide closely enough to know who's a grub and who's not.
He's
But
a
I
massive
discovered
grub.
that in this game. And I was like, this guy just loves getting in and amongst it.
Yeah,
And yeah, that was an interesting sight to behold. I thought Christian Petrarca could have played better. Like, he wasn't bad, but
yeah.
like, considering how much of a star player he's been for the competition the previous seasons, I feel like he needs to step up.
Yeah.
I know there's been all the
He's a
drama
bit
that's gone on in the
injured.
background,
He's
but
still carrying, effects from that big injury he had, I feel.
But is that going to be the end of his top level performances then?
I think
Because
so.
as of right now, like, it's not reaching the levels that he once was at. So that's going to be a problem for Melbourne. That might be a potential opportunity to draft him away not draft him, trade him away and maybe get something better, more bang for your buck, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but both these teams, when they're fit and firing and actually playing well as a team, are actually good football teams. I think you agree with that, right?
true. I think if you are Melbourne, you really have to seriously think about trading away some of these players, especially if, who do you keep? You keep like Max Gorn, obviously, they just signed Pickett, but he's young. I just think these players such as like, obviously Petrarca, but then maybe Clayton Oliver as well is getting to that sort of older age. Do you try and just be like, if you're going to be bad or try and get good draft picks, you got to do it now because Tasmania is coming and they're going to take away all the good young talent. So I just think they've got to make a choice, and I think that they've shown some promise, obviously, but I just think that for the future, you're not going to have Petrarca around for another 5 years. You're not going to have them, even maybe Max Gorn. That might sound crazy, but he's at this highest level of lucrative like draft picks you could get for him. Do you trade away Max Gorn to try and make it
I don't think it's a bad shout.
like the worst thing in sports is to be in the middle. You either be really
And
bad.
the best players don't want to be in the middle.
No, and you either want to be really bad and try and get a lot of draft picks and build your club in a new direction, or you obviously want to be really good. And I think that where not Melbourne are, they're not really where they want to be, or where they should want to be, is my opinion. So, anyway, we'll move on from that game. This is it was a good game, but it will probably be forgotten to time. The next one was another one that, showcased the incredible lack of skill that West Coast have. 7-10-52, got defeated by the Carlton Blues 12-14-86. I got to admit that this was a little bit of a background game. I didn't really watch much of this game because I knew
only
that
caught the
Carlton were
fourth
going.
quarter, so I was the same.
Again, Carlton just kind of pushed away with it. They had a great opening stanza, and then they just kicked away, and they just couldn't keep up, could West Coast, and that's kind of been their moniker all season. So again, West Coast only won one game. I think the thing that you could talk about more is obviously Carlton. They've moved up to 10th now, so still kind of in that sniffing distance for the 8, but I think that them playing against teams like West Coast and showing this kind of, I guess, doesn't really fill you with a lot of confidence if they made the 8 that they would actually do something. So anyway, I think that unless you have anything, I'd like to have a look at the ladder now, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's move on to the ladder.
Yeah, this West Coast game was a bit of a poopy stinker. And
I agree.
This is how the ladder rounds out at the end of round 14. You got Collingwood, who were on a bye. You had Geelong, obviously, moving up. Brisbane going down because they lost. Adelaide also going down because they lost. Hawthorn moving up there to 5th. Gold Coast, who are still 2 games in hand compared to all the teams above them except for Collingwood. So the Gold Coast have to, they've still got the opportunity to make the top 4, even though they're sitting in 6th now. They've still got a good chance because they're 2 games out or 2 games in hand, I should say. GWS didn't move anywhere, and then Freo didn't move anywhere, but they're in 8th spot now. So you got that little grouping there of like, I'm not even going to consider Gold Coast there because they're 2 games. Just that GWS, Freo, and then if you move to the bottom 10, you got I guess GWS, Freo, Western Bulldogs are kind of the ones that I'm looking at to try and make the 8. I think as we get further along, the Carlton, Port Adelaide, Essendon can kind of get pushed away to the side. What are your thoughts kind of on that ladder before? I guess we can kind of skip because the bottom 4 has been the same for the whole year.
Yeah, but if you want to stay on this page though, because this is my biggest dilemma in my head, because I look at the Bulldogs and I'm like, they'll definitely make the 8. But I look at Carlton, I look at Port Adelaide, I even look at Sydney, and I'm like, are these teams actually good enough to get into the 8? And I just don't think they are. I can't see who they replace.
I mean, I'll go back to the other one, and I think GWS could fall out, but then I mean they won, you know, they won, but then I can see Freo being flaky, you know. Gold Coast, I don't know. Like, I know they still have the 2 games, but man, they've got some tough games. Like next week, they've got GWS, so it's kind of a 6th versus 7th.
That is a huge game. Good shout.
That's a big game. So if they lose that, they're going to go down to 7th, and they could go down to 8th. They could
drop out. Yeah,
they could drop to 8th.
Far out.
I don't. What's their percentage? So they're 123, and Western Bulldogs are at 127. So you know, like if Gold Coast lose that game, they could drop down to 9th. But they still have a game in hand. So, you know, you got to think about that sort of thing. People were writing Gold Coast into the top 4 at the start of the season. And I said, just wait. Gold Coast are going to Gold Coast. So that's my opinion. But, I think it's going to be a very interesting race. And I can't believe that it's round 14 already. It's going to be a crazy run to the end of the season. So we'll have a look at some of the games that are coming up next week. So you've got Thursday, or I should say this week, Thursday game.
I have a question for you, Harry, before you move on. Out of Western Bulldogs, Carlton, Port Adelaide, Essendon and Sydney.
Yeah.
Because I think we can write off St Kilda, we can write off Melbourne.
Yeah.
Out of those 5 teams.
I think you can write off Sydney as well.
Okay, we'll write off Sydney as well. All right, so Essendon, Port Adelaide, Carlton, Bulldogs.
Yeah.
Who out of those 4 teams, if you had to make a prediction, only one of them can scrape into the 8, who do you think it'll be?
Bulldogs. Easily.
I agree.
Easily Bulldogs. I think that it might get a little bit of separation, especially because the Bulldogs, who are they playing this week? They are playing Richmond. So, you know, I think they should probably win that game.
Another percentage booster?
Hopefully for them, they'll be wanting a bit of a percentage booster. But yeah, I think that if I had to pick one team to come in and one team to go out by the end of the year, it would be Bulldogs in. I'm going to say GWS out.
Ooh, okay.
I don't know. I just think they're a bit hot and cold, GWS. Yeah. I don't know.
I think you might be right.
Well, speaking of teams vying for the 8, Freo are playing Essendon on Thursday night, June the 19th. And then you have huge game at GMHBA, like we spoke about before, Friday, June 20th, Geelong versus Brisbane. And then you have a couple of somewhat mediocre games on the Saturday early slate. You've got Carlton, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Sydney, got Collingwood, St Kilda. So again, 4 teams on a bye, so only 7 games this round, which kind of spaces it out nicely. And then the 2 games is the battle of the expansion teams at NG Stadium in Sydney, GWS versus Gold Coast, and then, as we spoke about before, Bulldogs versus Richmond. So some really good games there. Some Geelong versus Brisbane is one that stands out to me.
Yeah.
Collingwood, St Kilda could be good. GWS Gold Coast as well would be a good one as well. So. But we are getting to that kind of stretch round where some of these games are games that you're not even going to really have a look at. If if there was 9 games on, I would not be looking at Port versus Sydney. I just wouldn't care. You know, like it's one of those nothing kind of games at this point in the year. But yeah, round 15 coming up. We've got, man, how many more rounds is that? It's only like 8 more rounds. So it's getting tight. It's fun. I can't believe
we're not quite at
there.
the business end of the year yet, but we are on the precipice of deciding who's going to be in amongst the conversation for finals footy.
Yeah.
Because I think, 6 out of those 8 teams are probably pretty safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's 2 teams. It could be Fremantle, it could be the Giants that I think could maybe fall out. The Suns as well. So look,
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see over the next couple of rounds how it all transpires. That's for sure.
And we'll be here to cover it as always. So thank you so much, Caleb, for joining me. And thank you so much to everybody for watching. Really do appreciate it. We are, as he said, 14 rounds in. We'll be back for round 15. Thank you, everybody. Well, have a good day.